All right, I think we're recording. Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's local government education program provided by the University of Illinois Extension, Prairie Rivers Network, and USDA Rural Development. Today, we'll be learning more about the benefits of renewable energy for rural communities, small businesses, and farmers. My name is Lisa Merrifield, and I'm a Community and Economic Development Specialist at University of Illinois Extension, and I'll be your moderator for today. Now, I'd like to turn it over to Amanda Pankow from Prairie Rivers Network, who will introduce our speakers and get us started. Amanda?
Thank you, Lisa, and thank you everyone for joining our Clean Energy for Rural America webinar. My name is Amanda Pankow, and I work on energy issues with Prairie Rivers Network. I lived in rural communities in central and southern Illinois most of my life, and I especially enjoy when I can work with communities like my own. So today's webinar is brought to you by my organization, Prairie Rivers Network, as well as U of I Extension and Rural Development. We'll be able to share today's slides, and you can find contact information on this first slide here. So I want to just give an overview of what we're going to hear today. On today's webinar, I will start with a very brief introduction about the transition to clean energy and the benefits to be gained. Kim Knowles, a policy specialist, also with Prairie Rivers Network, will share information about existing state and federal incentives for clean energy, focusing mostly on solar incentives. And then Callie Heidbreder with Rural Development will talk specifically about the Rural Energy for America program, also known as the REAP grant. And finally, we'll hear a solar and REAP grant success story from Tasha at Bespoke Gift Company. And I'll be sharing more detailed bios about each presenter in the chat as they get their presentation started. So before we talk about some of the specific opportunities available for clean energy, let's take a look with a wider lens and talk about how and why the transition to clean energy is happening and what benefits can be gained. So this growth we're experiencing in clean renewable energy in the rural Midwest is part of a national trend that's expected to accelerate. So this graph shows the percent share of different generation sources over time, including projections into the future. So you'll see that for the past decade, we've seen a shift away from coal as it's been replaced with cheaper natural gas, and renewables have contributed somewhat to that shift, increasing from 10% of generation to 21% over the past decade. And as the graph shows, you'll see that we expect the renewable share of the electric generation market to continue to grow, and additional changes to state and federal policy could certainly accelerate and amplify this transition. So clean energy is increasing primarily because costs are falling, and of course also due to concerns for pollution and climate change. On the cost front, between 2009 and 2019, wind energy prices fell 70%, and utility scale solar fell 89% on average. So today, utility scale renewable energy prices are significantly below those for coal and gas generation, and they're also half the cost of nuclear. Clean energy offers a significant opportunity to diversify our rural economies while generating cheap, renewable, and clean power for rural communities, homes, and businesses. So new tax revenue from these projects can help shore up local infrastructure like schools and emergency services while reducing the local tax burden on rural people. Farmers and landowners can receive land lease payments from project developers. Municipalities, farmers, businesses, residents that install their own renewable energy projects can save significantly on their energy costs. New jobs are created by the increased demand for local manufacturing and project installers and operators. These are some fun statistics. In the US, wind service technician and solar installer are the #1 and #3 fastest growing jobs. If we look at Illinois, between 2017 and 2019, clean energy jobs in rural counties grew at a rate of 37%. And that's compared to a rate of just 5% in our urban counties. The environmental benefits of clean energy are what brought me personally to this work. I'm an ecologist that worked for years in the coal industry in Southern Illinois. Clean energy uses less water. It creates far less pollution in the air and water and slashes greenhouse gas emissions. And lastly, I believe and hope folks will agree that clean energy can be a source of local empowerment in rural communities. So we saw the same thing happen with coal mining in Illinois. We have town names, mascots, and festivals to celebrate the history of coal mining in many places of Illinois. And I hope that our rural communities can continue to be proud of creating energy, but in a new way that's renewable and sustainable. And I do want to make a note that we recognize that the transition to clean energy is not without its challenges, including transmission and other infrastructure needs, public perception, bringing opportunities to rural electric cooperatives and municipal electric utilities that are often tied into long-term fossil fuel contracts and have other barriers to clean energy. So Prairie Rivers Network and many of our partners are working on many of these challenges as well. So I could share charts, graphs, statistics all day to demonstrate this shift to clean energy and its benefits, but I will save you from all of that. And I suspect that you all are already seeing solar, wind, energy efficiency, geothermal, and electric vehicle infrastructure projects in your communities. Or perhaps you're bidding from them yourself. So I'm showing pictures here of just a handful of solar projects in my community or that friends and family of mine have completed. Each of these folks have their own story of why they went solar and the benefits they are gaining. And we're going to hear one of these success stories from Bespoke a little bit later today. But I'd encourage all of us to learn the clean energy stories that are happening in our rural communities and share these stories with others. And before I hand it to Kim, I just want to say a note about public policy for clean energy. So the public, our state and federal leaders have recognized the benefits of clean energy and the need to support the transition with public policy. We can support the transition, we can help accelerate it, and we can also make sure that these investments are reaching people and communities that need them the most, like our rural communities. So up next, you're going to hear more about some of these state and federal incentives and programs, some of which are supported by Illinois' new energy law, the Climate and Equitable Jobs Act, the federal bipartisan infrastructure law, and other federal programs and investments. So with that, I'll hand it over to my coworker, Kim, to talk a little bit more about this.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks, Amanda. Thanks for putting that in context and giving that bird's eye view. So again, my name is Kim Knowles. Amanda and I work together at Prairie Rivers Network. I put my contact information here. You'll see it again at the end. I'm going to talk about, as she said, federal and state incentives for renewable energy resources. Amanda, are you advancing this for me? Amanda?
Yeah, yes, I can. Sorry.
Okay, cool. Because we're on the same. Okay. So I'll talk to you today about federal tax credits. I'll talk a little bit about accelerated and bonus depreciation, which is another federal incentive. And then I want to bring in some state incentives for solar. Next, please. So I wanted to start with what's a tax credit, because like I get confused. There's tax credits, there's tax deductions. I just don't want to assume that everybody knows. So a tax credit is actually a dollar for dollar reduction in the amount of income tax you would otherwise owe. So for example, if you have a $10,000 federal tax credit, it reduces your federal tax liability by $10,000. And what happens is, this is actually better than deduction. Deduction just reduces the income that's subject to tax. But what happens is, if you have to have enough tax liability to take advantage of the full benefit. So if your tax liability was $8,000, you wouldn't get the $10,000 tax credit. You would get $8,000 tax credit. It's referred to as the investment tax credit, typically the ITC. The ITC can be claimed for both residential and commercial solar projects. It's called a business or the commercial ITC. Next, please. So the ITC can be claimed on, we're going to focus on the business side today. The ITC can be claimed on federal corporate income taxes. Until the end of this year, it's 26%. So it's 26% of the cost basis of your project, as long as you commence construction before the end of this year. So the cost basis is essentially all of the figures that go into how much you paid, all of the eligible costs that you paid for the system. So if your cost basis is 40,000 this year, you take 26% of that and you'd get a tax credit of $10,400. Again, as long as you have tax liability of at least that much. Unfortunately, the ITC is falling to 22% next year. And then after next year, it's 10%. If you begin construction in 2024 thereafter. Now, typically a solar PV system, PV stands for photovoltaic. That's the technology used right now. A solar PV system, typically that's eligible for the ITC, can also use what's known as accelerated depreciation. Next. To be eligible for the commercial ITC, the system has to be used by a business that's subject to US federal income tax. The system has to be new, and in some cases you can use in limited cases, you can use some used equipment in that system. Under most circumstances, your solar PV system rebates, sometimes there's rebates, a utility might offer a rebate, a state might offer a rebate. In most cases, that rebate's not going to reduce your cost basis. So for instance, let's say ComEd has a $4,000 rebate for an inverter. I'm making this up. Typically that wouldn't come off if you have that $40,000 system, the $4,000 doesn't come off. So you get the full benefit of the rebate and the ITC. If it did come off, your basis would be $36,000, and then you'd only get a tax credit of 26% of $36,000. That's how that works. But in most cases, you don't have to worry about that. Next, please. So as I mentioned, a taxpayer claiming the commercial ITC for a solar PV system that's placed in service can also typically take advantage of what's known as accelerated depreciation. And under accelerated depreciation, the taxpayer can deduct a larger portion of the capital expense in earlier years. In addition, there's what's known as bonus depreciation, where if you choose to, you can take 100% of the capital equipment and expense it immediately, as long as your system is put in place by the end of this year. In 2023, that drops to 80%, 2024, 60%, 40, 20, 0, and 2027. So one thing I want to emphasize is to act now on these things. So the ITC, as I said, can only be claimed by entities that have a federal tax liability. So if you're tax exempt, like a school or a church or a government agency, you can't claim the ITC yourself, but there are arrangements, and these are very typical in Illinois. There are arrangements called third-party ownership arrangements, where typically there's your solar developer or installer, and there's a third-party investor. And that third-party investor is some entity like a bank that has a large tax liability, and they're trying to reduce their tax bill. So in these third-party arrangements, you don't actually own the system right away. The solar developer owns the system, and you enter into what's called a power purchase agreement or a lease. And so you're purchasing let's say the solar's on your church or your school. You're getting the benefits of that solar energy. You are purchasing the solar energy, or you're leasing the system for a period of 6 or 7 years, because that's how long you have to hold on to a system before you can claim the ITC. So this third party is claiming that ITC, you're getting the solar panel. That arrangement is allowing you to buy the solar power, or lease the system at a lower rate. And often what happens is after that period of 6 or 7 years, there's a flip. There's ownership can flip back to you, and then you own the system. And that's how you sort of indirectly get the benefit of the ITC if you're not subject to tax. There's also a federal geothermal tax incentive. And for those of you who don't know what geothermal is, Amanda has one in her home. It's a heat pump that circulates fluid, continuously transferring heat. So in the summer, there's piping in your home. It takes the heat and pumps it underground where it's cooler. The fluid picks up the cool temperature and returns that to the pipes in your house and cools your house. In the winter, it's the reverse, where it pulls cold and returns warm. Thanks, Amanda. So there's a federal income tax credit for geothermal. It's 10% here, and construction needs to begin before January 1st, 2024. There's no limit on the total amount of the tax credit. So if your system was 50, 10% is 5. If your system was 100, 10% is 10. So that's what I mean by no limit on the credit amount. It can be used in conjunction. It can be used to offset alternative minimum tax if you're subject to that. And the tax credit can be claimed over multiple years. So let's say you had let's say you have a $10,000 geothermal tax credit, and you only have $6,000 in tax liability in the current year. You can take that extra 4 and use it in the following year. Also, it can combine with solar tax credits. You could have solar and geothermal and get the benefits of both. Commercial geothermal systems also have accelerated depreciation. Typically, there's a 5-year maker's depreciation, but they're also eligible for 100% first-year special depreciation. Now, today we're just focusing on these tax incentives, and then Callie is going to talk to you about another federal program, but the bipartisan infrastructure bill is going to bring so many additional renewable energy incentives. They're rolling out as we speak. As I think I said, Amanda and I at Prairie Rivers Network are launching an initiative to educate rural communities about these benefits that are coming. What are they, and how might rural communities take advantage of them? One that is opening now, very soon, any day now, is the Clean School Bus Rebate Program. But there are others, and we want to help you understand them. We know you're getting a lot of information today, so don't worry, we're here to answer questions, and we want you to reach out to us to do more on this. So please look for additional webinars on clean energy incentives for rural communities from the feds. The last thing I want to talk about is what you can get from the state. So in Illinois, there's something called renewable energy credits, and then there's net energy metering credits. Renewable energy credits, they're both payments, monetary benefits. A renewable energy credit is a payment for the renewable energy created by the system. It's used generally, generally what happens is, let's say your Bespoke gift shop in Monticello, and you get a solar system on your roof. What typically happens, so that system, depending on the size and where it is, generates renewable energy credits. So money, right? Money per credit. And typically what happens is your developer will get paid for those credits. And in return, they are able to offer you the power purchase agreement or the lease or the sale of the product for less. And that's how they're able to get you a good deal, often because of the renewable energy credits that they receive. Money, they get paid for those. The other thing is net energy metering credits. This is also an incentive and a way for you to get these systems cheaper. What happens is these are monetary credits on your electric bill. So when you hook up a solar system, majority of cases, you're still going to have your connection to the grid. You're still going to have your ComEd or Ameren bill. But there are months where your solar system is going to overproduce. It's going to produce more energy than you use. And that excess energy, you get credits for those. That goes back to the grid. The utility has to keep track of that. And in subsequent months, when your system is not overproducing and you might have a higher Ameren or ComEd bill, you can use those net energy metering credits to offset your utility bill. This is a wonderful benefit. Both of these are. Finally, I just want to mention this new program. I'm a specialist in Illinois Solar for All, and it was a program designed in the Future Energy Jobs Act in 2017 for households that earn 80% or less of median area income. It's designed to prioritize projects in environmental justice communities. It also provides solar systems for public and nonprofit agencies that serve these communities. The RECs in Illinois Solar for All are higher than the general market that I just discussed, and customers are guaranteed significant savings. Now, There are several sub-programs in Illinois Solar for All. So there are projects, Illinois Solar for All projects that are residential. So you can see them on a family's home. There are Illinois Solar for All community solar projects. And there are Illinois Solar for All, as I mentioned, projects on nonprofit and public facilities that are critical service providers and serve these communities that I mentioned. So folks on this call may work with a nonprofit or a public facility that could potentially get one of these projects and save significantly. So there's my contact again. Finally, what I want to leave you with is to please don't wait. These incentives that I've discussed, and we'll discuss Callie. I'm not sure about Callie's program if that's ending, but these incentives, these tax incentives and the SRECs will likely never be as good as they are now. They do drop over time because the idea was that these would stimulate the market and then the incentives wouldn't be needed over time. So they do fall over time. So now's the time to act. Reach out to us anytime. And Callie's up next and she's wonderful. So enjoy the rest of the program.
Thank you, Kim. Let me get my screen shared here. 1 second. Can you see my screen okay?
Not yet. Not yet. There, yes.
Wonderful. Thank you. Well, I just want to say thank you to Prairie Rivers Network and Illinois Extension for having me today. It's a pleasure to be here and have the opportunity to talk a little bit about the Rural Energy for America program, or REAP, as we like to call it. So REAP is a grant and loan guarantee program available for either installation of renewable energy systems or the installation of energy efficiency improvements. Today, I'm primarily going to talk about the grant side because that seems to be what people are most generally interested in. But if anybody has questions about the loan guarantee side, please do not hesitate to drop those questions in the chat or shoot me an email and I'd be happy to, or give me a call and I'd be happy to discuss those with you. So basically, first and foremost, who's eligible for this program? So you must either be an agricultural producer or a rural small business. What we define as an agricultural producer is you must be able to demonstrate that at least 50% or more of your total income comes from agricultural operations. So if you, and that is gross income. So if you're able to demonstrate that, you would be eligible as an ag producer. Something to note from this as an ag producer is the rural area eligibility component does not apply for ag producers. So, you know, if you were an ag producer who was residing in a typically ineligible area, maybe more of an urban area, as long as you could meet this eligibility criteria, that would not disqualify you from participating in this program. As a rural small business, it's kind of a two-part eligibility criteria. One, your project must reside in an eligible rural area, which is typically those with a population of 50,000 or less. And you must fall within the size standards as identified by the Small Business Administration. We follow the guidelines that they have set. So basically just identifying, you know, which industry you fall within and choosing the criteria that fits your business the best. And as long as you don't exceed the size standard for that industry, then you would be eligible to apply as a rural small business. How can these funds be used? So I mentioned energy efficiency improvements. So there are a ton of different projects that can fall within the energy efficiency improvement area. So basically what we look for there is a reduction in energy consumption. So that leaves the plethora of projects available that we can look at. So many times what we see most commonly is maybe a lighting improvement. You're going to replace that older, less efficient lighting with newer LED bulbs, or we receive a lot of grain dryer replacements for farmers. So they're taking those older, less efficient grain dryers, replacing them with newer equipment. But there are, as you can see here, there are a ton of, it's not an all-inclusive list, but there's a ton of different projects that would meet that criteria. Again, as long as we can see a percentage of energy savings there, either through an energy audit or energy assessment, that project could potentially qualify for this program. The other component would be a renewable energy system. Just as there are other renewable energy systems that would qualify, but obviously right now the hot topic is solar. So that is the lion's share of the renewable energy systems that we're seeing is solar. One thing I wanted to mention, in order for your renewable energy system application to be eligible, if it is sharing the same meter as a residence, the applicant must be able to demonstrate that at least 50% or more of the proposed energy to be generated by the system will benefit the farm or the home, or farm or the business, excuse me. So basically what that means is we need to be able to see that the lion's share of the energy to be generated by that system will benefit the farm or the business. So basically we cannot give any grant funding to residential purposes. So it doesn't disqualify you if you are sharing a meter with your home. It just requires us to do a little bit of additional work to ensure that that project is eligible. And basically your total project cost would be prorated accordingly to deduct any of that residential usage, so that we can ensure that all the project costs are in fact eligible. Here are some examples of other renewable energy systems. Again, I know right now solar is the hot topic, especially with a lot of the Illinois incentives that are available as well. Ineligible projects. So basically anything that's illegal, it's off the table. So if you've got anything in concern, feel free to reach out. If you ever want to discuss eligibility, we're more than happy to go over that with you. But basically, if it's ineligible or residential, it's likely not going to work unless we can demonstrate, from that residential component that we've got the lion's share of the energy going towards the farm or the business. So a little more specifics about the program. So there are minimums. So as far as the guarantee, we're talking loans here. I know I mentioned I'm talking primarily grants, but I did include just a little blurb about loans. So we do have a minimum loan request, which is $5,000. The maximum loan request would be $25 million, and that cannot exceed 75% of eligible project costs. Basically, just a short little blurb on our guaranteed loans. It's essentially a insurance policy provided by USDA. For these REAP projects, we would do so that the loan amount cannot exceed 75% of total eligible project costs. We would guarantee 80% of that. So basically 80% of the 75%, if that makes sense. You can do a loan grant combo. So, if you've got a project that's interested in the grant side as well as the loan side, we can look at a combination application. And that combo application cannot exceed 75% of total eligible project costs. Switching gears back to grants. So that grant amount cannot exceed 25% of total eligible project costs. We do have minimums and maximums. So it'd be either 25% of total eligible project costs or whatever the maximum for that specific project type. So as you can see there, energy efficiency improvement, the minimum grant request would be $1,500, maximum would be $250,000. And for renewable energy systems, the minimum would be $2,500 and the maximum would be $500,000 for those grant requests. And again, that can be used in conjunction with the loan as well if you should choose to do so, but we would not be able to exceed that 75% of total project costs. Here's some items as far as what we would consider eligible project costs. My biggest, the main point I want to drive home about eligible project costs is what we consider an eligible project costs are only those costs incurred after a complete application has been received by the agency. So what I mean by that is I know right now there's so many issues with supply and demand that, maybe your solar developer or contractor may ask you to make a down payment or something along those lines. That is acceptable. It just has to be properly disclosed in the application. And I want you to know that does deduct what your total eligible project costs are, which would impact what your maximum grant amount is. So, if you've got a $100,000 system and you make a $20,000 down payment, Now your grant's only going to be based off of that $80,000 of total eligible project costs rather than the $100,000. So like I said, making those down payments isn't a deal breaker, but just something that I want you all to be aware of, that it would impact what your maximum grant amount will be if you were to make those down payments. Here are some items that would be considered ineligible project costs. Costs of equipment, construction or equipment costs that would be incurred regardless. I don't want to read the slide to you guys, but those are some items that would be considered ineligible. Now, here are some examples. I know sometimes it's easier to see tangible examples. I know Amanda had some great examples earlier as well. So here's an example of an energy efficiency improvement project that we did for Shimmerford Lincoln in Peru, Illinois. It's a car dealership, and what they did is a lighting improvement for the lights there on their car lot. So we were able to award a project to those to create an greater energy efficiency there at their car dealership. Here is a solar example for a car wash. I know maybe it's one that might not seem as conventional, but this is for the All-American Car Wash over in Fairbury, Illinois. So we were able to do a solar project there. This one's kind of unique. This is down in Southern Illinois for Big House Investments. This is a pond aeration system. So they've got they grow a fish, basically a fish farm. And so they applied for these aeration systems that are much more energy efficient. They can control them. They don't have to run 24/7. So creating efficiency even from a fish farm standpoint. So kind of a different type of project to see what those energy efficiency improvements can do as well. Here's a solar project for a bank. They did 4 different locations. So you can see they did some roof mount and ground mount projects there for Tompkins State Bank for their various branches over near Galesburg, Illinois. Here's, just as I mentioned, grain dryers are something that we see quite a bit of. So here's a energy efficiency improvement project, grain dryer improvement for Boneyard Grain, located in Longview, Illinois. So we were able to do that improvement for them. And here's another solar project for Waymeyer Seed Company in Muscoda, Illinois. So you can see their roof mount project. And again, I know some of these are larger scale, but we see different projects across the board. So we will, we'll look at anything, as we've seen projects come in at as small as a 5 kW. And then we've got our larger projects as well. As far as from an energy efficiency improvement, we've seen anything from a small lighting improvement all the way on up to, these grain dryers that are much higher dollar amounts. So again, as long as you're meeting the minimum criteria, no project is too small or too big. A few things I did want to mention that kind of concludes what some of the overview brief highlights of the project, but a couple items I want to mention is we do have deadlines. So right now we do accept applications year round. So right now we are in our fiscal year 2023 funding cycle. So we are accepting applications now through March 31st of 2023 in order to compete for our FY 2023 funding. We do have an early application deadline coming up on October 31st of 2022. And those are for grant requests of 20,000 or less. Basically what this is, so we can accept that application, up until March 31st, but getting that application in by October 31st basically gives you an opportunity to compete in an additional competition. So a little bit of a bonus, I guess, if you will, for applying by October 31st, if you're requesting 20,000 or less. To piggyback off of some of the items that Kim was talking about, yes, you can use those with the REAP program and it will not affect what your total eligible project costs are. So you can get that federal tax incentive, you can get your SREC from the state, and that will not impact what you're doing here. So you can essentially double dip, if you will. So that does not impact what we're doing here. So you certainly can take advantage of all of those benefits. I know Kim talked a little bit about your going into a power purchase agreement and things like that. And I don't want to get too deep into the weeds. I'd be happy to discuss a specific project you might have. But something I wanted to mention is with REAP, we have to be able to see ownership and control, documentation of ownership and control. So basically, if you are the applicant, you have to be the one who will be owning and controlling that system, for the life of the equipment. So we would, in that flip scenario, that would be something we want to talk a little bit more in detail about if that's a project that you are considering doing. Because like I said, if company A is going to be the applicant, they are the ones who have to be purchasing the system. Has to be, they have to have either ownership of the land that's going to be placed on, or they need to have some sort of agreement with the owner of that land, so that they can show that they will have access to that equipment for the useful life of the technology, while grant funds are being administered. So I know that's kind of a quick and dirty overview of the program. I'll be sticking around. I'll be happy to answer any questions that anyone has there at the end. Thank you.
Okay, everybody. Good to see everybody on today. As Amanda mentioned earlier, my name is Tasha Dunaway, and I'm the co-owner of Bespoke Gift Company. And I'm going to take you through a quick journey, certainly much quicker than it actually was in person, on our building a sustainable business here in Monticello. So getting started, we started out as a home-based business. And as we started to grow our business, we knew that there were going to be more decisions to be made about how much money we wanted to invest. And as we decided that the business needed a physical location in order to grow further, we began looking and found a place in Monticello. And we really were concerned, though, about how much that was going to cost and whether we were going to be able to sustain a business economically. So whenever we think about solar, we do tend to think about sustainability in a couple ways: the economic sustainability for our business, and then also, of course, the sustainability of the grid and the environment. The burning question on our minds, though, when we're starting to think about moving into a physical space is that number one reason that small businesses fail. And I think most people realize this, but it's really because of that lack of working capital and having an inefficient operational footprint for your business. And so that was something that we wanted to address right away to be sure that we were prepared for anything that might happen. So in June, we began starting our business in Monticello, and we had looked at what the prior tenants of our building were paying, and they were spending about $5,000 annually on energy usage. And it was a different kind of business, so there are considerations there. But given that we had great sun exposure, we knew that we wanted to go solar, and that would make the investment in our business a lot more palatable for us. And it was something that we could ease into a lot more. So in June of 2019, that's what we did. We moved in, and then we began to get energy quotes for adding solar to our building, as well as some grant research to see if we could get some of the cost of the solar array paid for. Meanwhile, we also started to make energy efficiency changes to the business. That's something that you can really do at any time. And so you could see, and I should say that our building is approximately 136 years old, give or take. And so you can imagine that there are some efficiencies that we could really see right away. You can see that our consumption changed through a number of different improvements that we made. And this wasn't part of our REAP grant application. These were things that we just paid for out of pocket because they really weren't that expensive. Though I will say, I think we spent, about $500 or so on insulation. We unscrewed a whole bunch of light fixtures. We had about 50% more lights than we really needed. And then for the remaining ones, we added LEDs, and Ameren has some different, and probably other people do too, but they have some different efficiencies that you can get light bulbs essentially at cost to do those LEDs instead of the hotter burning and less efficient light bulbs that were in there. They were fluorescents. So those changes really helped a lot right away. Then, gosh, you get busy as a small business owner, and we attended and participated in the Monticello Boot Camp program, which introduced us to a lot of great professionals around town that we would later speak with about financing options for the solar array, or the small development community would be later really very helpful to helping us figure out, for example, how do we do this on our taxes? So thankfully, we met a lot of great, super smart people during this process. But because we were thinking, oh, I can do all of these things myself, I'm a small business owner, I'm amazing, we did miss the first round of grant applications for that first year in 2019. And so, gosh, all right, well, we'll keep going. Then 2020 rolls around, and of course, the government shuts us down because we are now in a pandemic. So really that reinvigorated our enthusiasm to reduce our operational costs, because guess what? Whenever you're mandatorily shut down, there's not a lot of cash flow coming in. During this time, it was really, really interesting because Main Street America, which is a national nonprofit that's interested in making sure that small communities like ours that have a main street, historic Main Street, are seeing economic gains, and that they're preserving these old buildings and things. And they did some surveys that basically showed that the leanest businesses are going to fare the best because they need the least amount of cash flow in order to continue business. Now, that also showed that most people had less than 2 months of cash flow on hand in order to pay their bills. So if they weren't having money come in, then that was going to be a problem for a lot of folks. And we saw that later with the American Rescue Act and a number of other changes. But meanwhile, we heard in the news that so many business owners were mandatorily shutting, their doors first, and then they were deciding that they could never afford to come back from it. And so we wanted to be sure that we weren't one of those businesses. So we went ahead and resolved to go ahead and complete our REAP grant application and to move forward with solar. Now, I didn't quite resolve to work with a grant writer just yet. So November comes and goes, and I do miss that under 20,000 opportunity that Callie just mentioned to go ahead and put in a very competitive grant for that round. But it was okay, because that was enough to make me decide that I needed to work with somebody, which honestly the USDA and the SBDC had both told me, you need to just work with somebody. It's, they know what they're doing, they have experience, they know how to make sure that all your documents are accounted for. So that is really good advice. So I'm passing it on to you. And that's why I tell you my shortcomings here is that all of us are doing too many things, and you should really just utilize those professionals for the help that they can provide you. So in December, finally, with the help of a grant writer, we did get our application in. We were then able to get everything ordered. And then in March of 2021, our solar array was installed and activated. Now, this essentially, in some ways, you can think of it that we were actually able to then reuse the money that we would have been paying the electric company. For short term, we were paying for our solar array. For the long term, this is money that we can now utilize to pay for a part-time person instead. And I think as a very small and agile company, that sometimes would be a decision that maybe you wouldn't be able to make if you didn't have that flexibility by reducing your operational costs. So we hire our very first person in July of 2021. And then in October, after that funding round has finished, we do find out that we are REAP grant recipients, happily. Then in December, as Callie also mentioned, you can utilize both SRECs and you can utilize the REAP grant. And so in conjunction with the money that we've been paying monthly for our solar array through our financing option, plus the REAP grant and the SREC payment, couple extra dollars and we're good to go. We have completed payment of our entire array the first year. Now, what's kind of cool is that we also had from April 2021, which is the first full month that we had solar turned on, to this past April, we spent a whopping $248 on electric. Now, that is because of those kilowatt for kilowatt credits that you get. And I do know that the different companies are a little bit, they have different policies about this, but our company is Xamarin, and for them, you get, 1 for 1. So in the months that we were overproducing, you then leverage those credits for months later where you're not producing quite as much. So how can you create sustainability? You look at the total ROI just like you would any other business decision that you're looking to make. For us, the payback period was very short. In some sense, I felt like that made us not a very compelling case to get a grant, because you're thinking it's not a lot of money for somebody that's only getting a 10 kW system. But as you saw, Callie gave some examples, and so did Amanda, that they're really trying to represent, I think, the gamut of different types of businesses and different sizes. So you could be very competitive. You just don't know. You're looking also at the price per watt, and national estimates, I think, or I guess rather the state estimates, there are different ranges for how much your SRECs are going to represent for the total cost of the system. It sort of depends on a lot of things, like how much does it cost for you to buy. But for us, it was a very small percentage, and over time, because we're in it for the long haul, we felt that the investment was really worthwhile and would be freeing up enough money in the future that that's something that we wanted to do. And then consider, when you think of an investment, think of your time also. I missed 2 rounds of being potentially awarded a grant because we didn't work with somebody, and instead I thought I could do it myself. And ultimately that meant that I didn't get the grant application in at all, which is obviously I'm not going to get a grant if I can't even get the application in. So thankfully, working with a grant writer really helps that process. And then again, just repeating that total cost that we spent on electric that year, I think it speaks for itself. Here's what our system looks like. You can see that it's a 10.14 kW system. And then I did a presentation for the Rotary Club in January. And so I had this screen capture of the app that shows me my production. And I thought it was still really interesting because it was 16 degrees out, whopping 16 degrees in January, but you can still see that it was producing. And this at the time was how much we had produced all the way from the beginning of the system. And then this is updated to just yesterday of how much we've produced in total. The end-to-end process, because I know you business owners are probably curious. Of course, you're going to get multiple quotes. You will need to do that before you decide on who's going to be doing the work for you. And there are different considerations that we've already seen illustrated, like the size, the type of panels that you want, how efficient they are, where you want to put them, and whether you want a roof mount versus ground mount, etc. Then there are a lot of there are other grants and loans, I'm sure, out there. The Small Business Development Center has additional loans in addition to the USDA ones that you might qualify for too. And then you're going to want to sign a contract and get insurance for your array. And you'll need all that paperwork for that process. And then, of course, you'll have a couple good days of weather needed before you can do the installation. Probably not a good idea to do it in like the super deep snow or anything. And then the electric company will come out and do a couple of different inspections to make sure everything's okay to be turned on, and then they'll connect it to the grid. So I put some key takeaways for you guys here. Go ahead and work with those professionals right away. They're the professionals for a reason. Do engage with places like the Small Business Development Center and the USDA and the other folks, the experts on this call here, because they may know of things that you qualify for that you just aren't aware of. Your accountant and your bank probably also have really good information for you. It's some of those professionals that I mentioned I met at the Monticello boot camp can help you figure out exactly how you should set everything up. And then remember that the cost to finance your array is immediately going to be offset by the money that you're saving. So if you're able to take it on, it's really the best thing for the long run. And pro tip that your local lending agencies may have more flexibility than those national guys, but you probably know that already. Do again, contact a grant writer. The USDA had a list of people who they receive grant applications from. And I know a couple other too. I bet other people on this call know more. So you can always find references for those folks and speak to them about how successful they've been and have them give you examples. You can get a few quotes, but try not to completely slow your progress by getting too many quotes. I ended up getting 5. I probably needed 3. But the installers and the contractors don't do things the same way necessarily. So I would definitely get 3 and have them give you examples of other work that they've done. And here, when we're talking about the economic development too, your small contractors may be a little bit cheaper because they don't have as much operational cost either. So they may be able to get you a system for even less money than you think. And then of course, we've said it before, but create those efficiencies now. You can start saving energy now, and then that's less that you actually have to create in order to offset your total cost. So think about the dollars that go out the door when you leave lights on. Those LED lights are a lot more efficient than other styles. Add insulation. That's a super easy, very cheap way to go. And even point of use water heaters. And then of course, just a conservation mindset will help ensure that you're utilizing all of your assets to their best. All right, thanks for everybody for coming today. And I think now the team is going to take questions.
All right, thank you so much to all of our presenters. We've had a few questions come in the chat, but certainly if you have others, keep popping them in and we will get through as many as we can. Callie or Tasha, I don't know if you're willing to share this, but speaking about the grant writers, about what does that cost somebody, or what should somebody expect to pay for a grant writer?
Sure, Callie probably works with more of them than I do, but I think most of them are very, well, first of all, they're very upfront about their fees. So they'll tell you if it's a flat rate, it's usually a minimum and then a percentage. So the bigger your system is, the more money it's going to cost you, but the more likely it is that it's really, if it's really a big system, it's probably pretty important and you want it to be done well. So I would still encourage people to do that.
I would agree with what Tasha said. They're all so different, but just as she mentioned, many of them I think charge a small upfront fee just for their services and then would charge a percentage of your grant on the backside. But they're all a little bit different, so that's why I just recommend doing your due diligence and checking with each of them to see what their fee structure is like.
Excellent, thank you very much. Another question came in about the 2-year payback period. Is that a common payback length, or do most people require longer to pay back to see the benefits of installing this kind of system?
I can answer that based on some experience of a group buy, a solar group buy that we do here in the East Central Illinois area. I would say for businesses and farms that are able to access those tax credits, the solar renewable energy credits, accelerated depreciation, and then if you tack the REAP grant on top of that, a 2-year payback is probably about the fastest you're going to see. I would say in that circumstance, 2 to 5 years would be normal for a lot of homes. We see more of like a 6 to 12 year payback. But again, this all depends on, is your roof south facing? Are there any trees? There's so many variables to a lot of these questions that it's hard to say. But yeah, 2 years is certainly a fast one, but with all of those benefits stacked on top of each other, it's definitely not unheard of.
All right. I think the other questions that have been asked were answered in the chat. But certainly if I've missed anything. A question just came in from Brad. Who should I contact first to start planning? What's the first step? Somebody who's interested.
Maybe you could just ask to clarify what kind of project he's asking about.
Good point, Brad. What can you can unmute yourself if you'd like to just ask. Oh, he says solar for a small business.
My recommendation is to start with looking at your historical consumption and meet with some different vendors, just as Tasha commented. Maybe you get a couple, 2 or 3 different quotes and do your due diligence from that standpoint. But you're first and foremost going to need to understand the scope of your project before you can look at applying for a REAP grant, at least from my standpoint. So that would be that would be what I would recommend. And again, we must have that application in our office before your project begins. So that's something that I really want to drive home, because if the project has already started or has already been completed or significant down payments have been made, it's really going to significantly affect your project.
Right.
Can
Thank
I ask
you.
a question then to Callie about that?
Sure.
Absolutely.
What do you mean by before your project begins? Is that before money is spent in your project?
Correct.
Okay.
That's correct. So what we consider the start of the project would be construction. So, if they're already beginning that project, or if you've already made that, then you would not be eligible to apply at all. If you've already made significant down payments, that doesn't necessarily mean you can't apply. However, that's going to affect what your maximum grant amount is, because again, it's only off of, any costs incurred before your application has been received are considered ineligible. So if you make a $20,000 down payment to get that project started and to get everything ordered, that has to be deducted off of your total eligible project cost, meaning your maximum grant amount would be lowered.
Thank you. That's helpful. All right. We are at about the top of the hour. And so with that, I think we'll close today. Thanks so much to Amanda, Tasha, Callie, and Kim for this great information. We sure appreciate it. Any other final parting words before we end?
Thank you for having us, and feel free to reach out with any questions anyone might have about the program. I'm happy to discuss anyone's project in detail if they're concerned if maybe they would be eligible or not. I'm more than happy to discuss that with anybody if they have further questions.
Excellent. Thank you so much, and have a good day, everyone.
Thank you.